Dzień dobry, szanowni państwo.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to ask the president of the Warsaw Stock Exchange, Mr. Marek, Dietl, to come to the stage and take the floor. President, the floor is yours. Well, what a beautiful day. I would like to welcome you all very cordially to this conference of the 3 stock exchanges, and Krakow, I believe, is the best place to hold this conference because this is a royal city whose heyday was in the Jagiellonian dynasty's times, who were the first proponents of the thought of the 3 region. And I would like to very cordially welcome the President of the Republic of Poland, Andrzej Duda, who is our honorary patron. I would like to thank him very much for this patronage. This, Mr. President, is a huge honor, not only for the Warsaw Stock Exchange, but for all the stock exchanges in the 3 region. I would also like to welcome the representatives of the President's office, led by Minister Krzysztof Szczerski, who is the head of the President's office. And I would like to welcome other employees and managers from the President's cabinet, President's office. I would like to thank you very much for supporting us in the organization and for participating in this meeting. And this conference couldn't take place without the representatives of the stock exchanges. So I would like to welcome the presidents of the Prague, Ljubljana and Bucharest stock exchanges, and the presidents who are with us remotely, the presidents of the Budapest and Bratislava stock exchanges. I would like to welcome all the representatives of the media, and now I would like to hand over to the president.
Szanowni Państwo,
distinguished presidents, CEOs of stock exchanges, all distinguished guests. First and foremost, I would like to express my great joy and thank you from the bottom of my heart. I wish to say I am delighted because this meeting of the CEOs of the 3 stock exchanges takes place. So it is my pleasure that you decided to come to Krakow, to come to Poland, that you're willing to participate in our meeting, also through the internet, online. But I'm glad that we're here together and that we're able to discuss today about the cooperation, that we can discuss the development of capital markets, or broadly speaking, of a large capital market of this part of Europe, of the 3 countries, because whatever we say, 1/3 of the European Union's territory accounts for 1/4 of the European population. I'm thinking here about the European Union, of course. And ladies and gentlemen, this is just 10% of the capital. So it's still not enough, but at the same time, it opens up a huge perspective in front of us. Having said that, I'm glad that you're here and that we are developing our cooperation. I would like to say it is not only my honor, but first and foremost, I am delighted that I can take patronage over your meeting. I would like to thank with all my heart President of the Polish Stock Exchange, Dr. Marek Dietl, for organizing this meeting, because I think that, as you probably know, the 3 is one of the most important areas of my work over the last 5 years. I recall the day when, in September 2015, I met with Madam President of Croatia, Mrs. Kolinda Grabar-Kitarovic, and precisely here in Krakow, we talked about creating a cooperation format on the European level between the Baltic Sea, the Adriatic Sea, and the Black Sea. Back then, it seemed a very distant perspective. Nevertheless, I was absorbed and full of the knowledge that I had acquired when I served President Lech Kaczyński, the former president of Poland, who really thought this cooperation in this part of Europe was very important indeed. He believed that we do have the potential to develop. And first and foremost, President Lech Kaczyński believed that we have similar histories, that we went through similar difficulties, especially in the 20th century. And that because of that, you're able to understand each other better, perhaps, than we're able to make an understanding with our colleagues from Western Europe who never experienced communism and who never really felt what it means, constriction of the freedom of speech, who never really felt what it meant when somebody does not allow you to travel, when you are blackmailed or invigilated or followed, or when you are put into prison just because you want to be a free person. And I think that he was right to a large extent. I have no doubt whatsoever that we, in our part of Europe, are able to understand each other. But first and foremost, we are hugely ambitious. Sometimes there might be this impression that the west of Europe has got everything, but we still have the feeling, the sense that we still need to catch up, we still need to achieve something more. And we've got great ambitions in this respect. Both us and especially younger generations, those generations which are following into our footsteps, which are entering mature lives now, also they present a huge opportunity for our part of Europe, for us, for our countries and our societies. However, there is a huge task that we have got in front of us today. We should create for them as broad a basis as possible to let them act. We are building airports, I can say, so that the fleet can be further developed and so that we can become one of the powerhouses in this particular sector. So this is the task that we have got in front of us today. For the last 5 years, I have tried to organize the 3Cs cooperation across many different areas, all areas, because I was very much glad that we were able to give that spark of interest which resulted into establishing cooperation among presidents. That was vital to me, and those meetings did happen very fast. I was also delighted when the President of the United States, President Donald Trump, whom all of you know perfectly well and who has got tens of years of experience in large business, and I could see that spark in his eye when he was listening to the idea of the 3Cs, when I informed him about the economic and investment cooperation laying dormant in the 3Cs format. By the way, in 2017, he visited Warsaw. He participated in the 3Cs summit. He met then with us, with the presidents, and back then he added the United States very clearly as a partner of the 3Cs initiative. And recently he decided that $1 billion will be dedicated for the development of the 3Cs fund, which we started a couple of years ago. So I'm really glad, I'm delighted that the 3Cs has obtained such a huge partner. And today, the 3Cs idea is interesting to Japan. Also, China is interested in cooperating with the 3Cs states. So, in other words, global superpowers can see the potential in our part of Europe. But I've always believed that our fundamental task is to act on our own as far as our development is concerned. The basic element which led us when we were developing the 3Cs cooperation was not a great politics, understood as politics. It was rather economy. We were speaking and thinking about investments in the first place. We saw in a very clear way that the infrastructure level in our part of Europe and along the north-south axis is absolutely underdeveloped because all of us have got quite efficient links with Western Europe or with the east of Europe. But it turned out that as far as the connectivity between north and south is concerned, then generally, through our countries, if you want to get to the Adriatic or to the Black Sea from the Baltic Sea, it lasts a very long time indeed. And that is something that we wanted to change. We wanted to build express roads and highways. We wanted to build railway lines, at least of medium speed. And we very much wanted to establish good energy connections, which will ensure energy security to all of us so that we can develop cooperation among us from the economic perspective, but also from the perspective of human connections, people-to-people connections. It was hugely important to us to develop tourism, to develop people-to-people relations, and last but not least, to also make sure that the trade can develop so that we can establish and forge closer economic links so that it would be easier to supply goods from the Baltic states to Bulgaria, to Romania, to Croatia, Croatia and the other way around. That was of crucial importance to us, and I'm delighted that over the last 5 years this is happening. I'm glad that a cooperation within the 3Cs initiative has developed, and it's got so many different formats today. I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that my biggest sorrow was that it could be closed within the format of the presidents only, and that it would lead only to exchanging nice words, to saying, okay, we would like to cooperate very much, we would like to develop our part of Europe, and we would like to catch up within the European Union all the distance that still separates us from the West, and that nothing concrete would result from that. That was a big threat, something that I had in the back of my head, and I raised it on many occasions. Now I'm happy that also the Prime Minister has joined us in this format. I'm also happy that the ministers got involved, and I'm really delighted that business has got involved, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway or other, the business is the salt of the earth, and if somebody wants to develop, if you want to have a true development, of course politicians are important. We can stimulate, we can support, we can institute different institutional formats of cooperation, such as the 3Cs Fund. We can also search for different programs and projects which would foster investments, but we ourselves as politicians are not going to realize those investments. Without business, without the business sectors, there will be no investments whatsoever. And that is why I'm so happy that in the meantime, the CE Plus index has been established. I'm glad that the 3Cs Initiative Fund has been initiated, that today we have got a list of the 3Cs projects of priority importance, that we've got the Forum of the Regions, that we've got the Economic Congress of the 3Cs initiative, that there is the Economic Forum and the Business Council, which was initiated this year in Davos. And last but not least, I'm very much happy that this meeting today is taking place, because the capital market does play a vital role in all of that. Of course, some voices may say it is wonderful that the 3Cs companies cooperate with each other, for you are representing companies here today. Every single stock exchange represented here is an entity of the capital market, that is obvious. However, first and foremost, you co-create the capital markets in our countries. And by the same token, as I said in my introductory remarks, you co-create this part of the common European capital market, which is constituted by the Central European countries. I'm really happy because to a certain extent, you also have an influence, an impact on the entities which are operating on your markets. Today, in many cases, these are the companies which are operating in the cutting-edge technologies sectors, IT companies, those which are experiencing a very dynamic development today, and that stimulation of which, the encouragement of those companies to cooperate also on the 3Cs market might generate the effect of synergy. And I do hope that you are going to do this, ladies and gentlemen, while talking here also. And I do hope that you're also going to discuss the perspectives of how the 3Cs can develop. I'm very happy to have you here. I'm delighted that this cooperation is being forged, and I'm so happy that through your cooperation, the whole 3Cs initiative is being filled with content. I'm really happy with that. It is also my great pleasure that today you are meeting in my home city of Krakow. I was born here, I come from here. Krakow might not be the center of Polish business. For this business center in Poland, and the seat of the stock exchange is in Warsaw. Nevertheless, Krakow is the heart of Poland. This is a historical former capital of our country, and it was here that in the Wawel Castle Polish kings were residing, and that was happening for hundreds of years. So we can openly say that the time when Krakow was the capital of Poland was one or even the best period in the history of our country. So I would like to make sure that today, while working for the sake of the Republic of Poland, by we I mean Polish politicians, representatives of the Polish capital market, that we also refer to those best traditions. That was the time when also along the north-south axis we were not waging wars against each other. Traditionally, we were waging wars along different directions. And I would like to make sure that the cooperation which we had back then between Poland and Hungary, between Poland and Lithuania, I would like to continue this cooperation. I would like to make sure that this cooperation flourishes and develops. I hope and I think we have got a huge perspective to do that. Living in those peaceful times, for more than 30 years we have lived in free, independent and sovereign states. To us Polish people, when we look back into our history, right now we have got the largest opportunity to develop from the 17th century. It might be hard to believe, but that is the truth. The last time that Poland had similar strength and power as it has today was in the 17th century. And it is a huge task to jump at this opportunity, to take advantage of it. And I hope that we're going to cooperate with each other, building the prosperity of our countries, of our nations, of our part of Europe, and at the end of the day of the entire European Union, because I have no doubt whatsoever that the development of the three Cs, which is an inherent part of the idea of equal development of states within the European Union, the cooperation of the three Cs, which is supposed to speed up the development of our part of Europe, is conducive to the whole European Union. It serves the good of the entire Europe. Thank you once again for this meeting, and I wish you good meetings, good discussions, and fruitful deliberations. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję, panie prezydencie.
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, the President talked about something that we really should pay attention to, and as an economic journalist, I will certainly keep this in mind, and I hope you will be talking about it. 10% of the equity, 10% of the equity as compared to the entire EU, and such a large potential. And touching upon what the President has said, driving south is much easier now, because driving to Croatia now doesn't take as long as it used to several years ago. And actually, one of the largest Croatian newspapers has written recently that Poles this year seriously supported the Croatian tourism. So I think that as the connections improve, there will be even more of us traveling there. And now I would like to ask Mr. Marek, who is the CEO of the Warsaw Stock Exchange, to take the floor. Mr. CEO, please take the floor. Distinguished Mr. President, Mr. Minister, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, presidents of the stock exchanges, the region of the three Cs, christened by President Duda, is our huge joint opportunity that I would compare to how listed companies develop. Well, because how do you get big listed companies? Because they used to be small and then they started growing. And the same applies to our region. Our region is at the stage at which it can grow very rapidly. The entire 3Cs region compared to the EU is 10% of the capital, but our region and also the countries outside of the EU, the share of the equity market in the GDP is about 17%. So not only are these companies slightly poorer than some of the countries in Western Europe, but also the share of the stock exchange capitalization to the GDP is only 17%, whereas the same factor for Western states is 75%. So you can see that we are still at this very early stage of building the equity market. On top of that, we are very diversified as the 3Cs region. We have both countries that are referred to in global statistics or indexes as frontier countries, which are the ones that are just starting their path to join the global investment world. Then there are the emerging, advanced emerging, and then there are those that have the status of developed markets. And this diversity offers another opportunity, because we can learn from one another, we can support one another, we can exchange experience, and this is a great opportunity. So out of these two things, so the relatively less developed equity market and its diversity offers opportunities. And in order to make use of these opportunities, I believe we have to overcome three important barriers. One barrier is that compared to the beginning of the 1990s, the perception of our equity market in the world, or the perception of our investment opportunities, our economies, is much lower. I remember when the Polish-American Entrepreneurship Fund was formed, and a similar one was formed in Hungary, there was a lot of excitement on the other side of the Atlantic, and everybody was talking about the statistics, how this new world is opening, the consumers, the quality of the human capital, the education, how you could benefit from that. And when you look through the weeklies of that period, we still had printed newspapers and magazines at that time. Now, our region was frequently mentioned. There were interviews with leaders of this region and so on. Whereas now, this region is no longer shining so strongly. This region is not so visible anymore. It has been obstructed, let's say, or hidden by the huge economic development in Southeast Asia, and it is our joint task to promote the investment opportunities, global investment opportunities, resulting from the potential of our region, which has to compete with many emerging economies, for example, of the Southeast Asia region. So the first element is to support one another in promoting this region. And the presence of the president here is a sign of the readiness to support this promotion. Thank you very much, President, because it is those soft elements like the political patronage of our region on the international stage and economic diplomacy are key elements on this path to greater recognition and greater visibility of our region in the world, particularly in the Asian countries, where both the geographic and cultural distance is such that regardless of the efforts we have made this year addressed at Asian investors, we had this virtual roadshow with those investors. There is some interest, but this interest is not producing a lot of Asian money invested in our region. The second challenge that we have to overcome, which is connected with the first one, is the fragmentation of our market. We are altogether not a very large investment target, and on top of that we're still split into separate countries, and this is why we have this initiative of the C+, the index of the 3Cs region. This is to integrate this region around products, or by creating products for investment products for investors who are interested in this part of the world, which is growing rapidly, but at the same time it is not very easily visible to them. And the third element, which might be surprising, is that our cooperation should be strongly focused on the fact that those who have accumulated capital in our region would like to invest in this region. It is a paradox that our region is actually exporting its equity. Many high net worth individuals and institutions are looking for investment opportunities outside the region and do this very actively. We saw this very clearly recently when we looked at the Polish equity market, where we had the third fastest growth in turnover of all the EU countries, mainly driven by retail investors whose share in our structure of the market grew from 12 to 22%. So the retail investors became active and they strongly contributed to our market growing faster than other markets in the EU. But at the same time, retail investors who came actually invested over 10% of their assets abroad, mainly in American technology companies. And this is a sign of the times that when we're thinking about attracting investors, we have to also strengthen our internal perception, our internal image, So how our listed companies are perceived inside our region, the companies that issue shares or bonds, because the globalizing equity markets and the easier access to foreign companies mean that the equity, that the capital is flowing out of our region, and our region needs capital a lot, because unlike Western European countries, we didn't have the time to gradually accumulate the capital, but we had to exit communism with this low base of capital, and what we have managed to achieve is a great success. The fact that in every country of the region we have a stock exchange and that it operates well is a huge success. The fact that we have asset management institutions, that we have brokerage offices, this is a big achievement. So we have all this infrastructure, but there is a lot to be done in order to place ourselves higher on the list of global asset management institutions, and so that we would create an offering for our local investors so that they would invest in their own countries, in their own region, which region has a huge potential. And I am convinced that this conference will contribute to this. I would like to thank you very much for your participation, not only to those of you who are here in person, but also to those of you who are with us remotely. We would like to thank you very much for this. And this means we are climbing to a new level. I'm talking to my colleagues from the other stock exchanges, that we have the highest authorities of Poland, the President of Poland, actually supporting the development of the equity markets here. Thank you very much.
Proszę,
Sir, could you please remain on stage, as now is the time to hold our panel. The title of the panel is The Challenges of Capital Market of the Three Cs and the Importance of the Regional Collaboration. So Mr. Petr Koblic from Prague Stock Exchange, Aleš Ipavec, the President of the Management Board of the Ljubljana Stock Exchange, Radu Hanga from the Bucharest Stock Exchange, and online we also will also have two more panelists, Richárd Végh from the Budapest Stock Exchange and Kubricky from Bratislava Stock Exchange. And our moderator is Petr Niklewicz. He's right here, so the floor is yours.
I can spare you mine.
Hello. Thank you, Marek. Thank you, Aleš. Gentlemen in Budapest and Bratislava, can you hear us clearly?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, in the room and over a virtual conference, I think it's pretty fair to say that 2020 has been fairly unprecedented in terms of what's been happening to whether it's our economies, capital markets, and societies. I guess the Central and Eastern European region, it's fair to say, has been a region of stability, and we could already see the green shoots of recovery in place. The indicators coming from the CEE region, from the Three Cs region, are overall positive. However, we live in a VUCA world, and a term that people maybe aren't familiar with. VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. That presents certain challenges, but also certain opportunities for us as countries, for us as nations, but also as exchanges. And I sort of did a little bit of a brainstorming thing before I came on stage. What are the challenges? What are we facing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis as exchanges? So regulation, maybe some level of overbearing regulation coming from from the corridors of Brussels, as we've seen the last few years. The cost and the development pace of technology. The growth of Asia, as Marek mentioned in his speech. COVID, not to mention. The dominance of the index providers. And last but not least, the endless video conferences, webinars, and virtual meetings that we will have to experience. We are experiencing this year. Before we get into the main topic of the discussion, I think it'd probably just be a good idea for the audience to hear about your individual markets. So the first challenge to you, gentlemen, within a maximum of 2 minutes each, is to introduce yourselves, introduce your markets, and just give the audience a flavor of what are the major initiatives, projects that you've been working on over the last 9, 12, you pick your timescale months. Okay, 2 minutes each. Maybe another.
So 2 minutes for 9 months, it's quite a challenging, as I had already 10 seconds gone. Radu Hanga from Bucharest Stock Exchange. Thank you very much for inviting us here, and we think it's a very good initiative, and a very good sign for us is to see the presidency of Poland here. I think that sends a very, very strong message about the support the local capital market gets from the political ecosystem. And I think that's something we have to look at. I think that in Bucharest and also in the other countries in the region, the capital markets are a very important pillar for the economic growth of the local economy, as the local capital market secures the access to capital for the local companies. So I think we have to learn, and we have to copy this approach. I think it works, and looking at where Warsaw Stock Exchange is now, this is due to this local strong cooperation. Going back to Bucharest Stock Exchange, we are following the same path. We are trying to strengthen the links with the state, with the government, with the local ecosystem. We want to position ourselves better as the main capital provider for the local companies looking to grow, looking to develop. And yeah, of course, we have the same challenges as everybody around: regulation, low level of intermediation, and we are working hard on that to improve the research coverage for listed companies, for example, to improve the brokerage ecosystem, and of course to offer support and education for the investor and the companies which are looking at the Bucharest Stock Exchange.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, also from my side, distinguished guests, Mr. President, thank you for the invitation. I'm really glad that we have such a distinguished guest here, which, as colleagues said before, means that capital markets is something that is not irrelevant. I would be really glad that it would be the same in our country, because as you know, Slovenia was once part of Yugoslavia, the first country that emerged from Yugoslavia, and was one of the most developed country at that time, and it still is right now, if we are speaking generally as an economy. But when the topic comes to the capital market, it's a completely different story. Marek mentioned before that average capital market in GDP is around 17% in the region. In Slovenia, it's 14%, so it's even lower than the average in the region. But yeah, as I said before, capital market was as an privatization platform very successful in Slovenia. But after that, nothing happened on the government level. So I'm really missing such huge support from the politicians in our country. But with maybe connections around the region, also on the politician level, I'm quite optimistic that maybe we will see also the capital market flourishing again in Slovenia.
Thanks, Aleš. Petr.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Marek, for organizing this wonderful event, and I would like to specifically thank Your Excellency for a wonderful speech. It was really exactly the point, what we have to take care about. You mentioned some numbers. Yeah, we are not really doing very well in Central Europe with the numbers, but unfortunately, this is also the picture in whole Europe. If we look at the sheer numbers, we have just one European company among top 20 technological companies in the world. All of them are basically American. Although in Europe, we have 2.5 times more startups in the technology than in the United States, where these companies are disappearing. My explanation is there is capital market missing. So it's also true about the European Union, about the countries which are west from us. And I can tell you from my own personal experiences, I'm also serving on the board of Wiener Börse. We are basically facing similar problems. The problems here are even deeper because of the country classification and indices, for example, and other topics. I would say this is great opportunity to discuss all that, and we have to transfer it to the political level. I think our ministries of finance for our countries have to spend on their meetings sometimes a couple of minutes speaking about the capital market, speaking about the fact that we have only 1/10 of the capital here, and we are net exporters of the capital, which is one of the most ridiculous things to the Western Europe and also to the US. And speak how we can challenge it. There are some things which we cannot change. We are simply smaller so far, and the capital markets are naturally smaller. But there are some things we can change, and we can create more pressure in European Union to be more open to us. And I think we hit some of those topics during the speech.
Thanks, Peter. Maybe heading over to the colleagues on the webcams. Richard, over to you first of all.
Thank you very much. First of all, Marek, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really disappointed that I cannot be with you in person because of the pandemic situation. But I'm glad that at least via online I am able to participate. First of all, again, I would like to again mention that it was really encouraging to hear the words of President Duda that the capital market in Poland is in the focus of the government, and as it was said, Duda is kind of patronage for the whole region's capital market. It is very, very encouraging to hear. Thank you very much. So the question exactly was about the Budapest Stock Exchange, what we were doing in the last months. For that, my answer is that we are kind of finishing our 5-year strategy this year. The main focus of this strategy was to really develop the local ecosystem and to provide services for Hungarian-owned companies to make them able to use the capital market. For that, we launched new markets for SME equity market and the new MTF for bond. For the time being, in the last 12 months, we have 15 bond issuances on that. And this year, we have 4 new companies on the equity market. And of course, because of the volatility, the volumes on the market were very good in the first half. But the summer months was much more quiet. So we are really curious to see what the autumn will bring. In the last months, we also started to work on the new strategy for the next 5 years. So maybe I will talk a little bit about that. And but as a teaser, I can say that we think that regional cooperation should be a little stronger in the next 5 years than it was in the previous one.
Thank you, Richard. Over to Peter in Bratislava.
Hello, can you hear me?
I think we can hear you very well. Thank you, Peter.
Okay, because I have regular difficulties here due to very bad sound connection. I can hear you very bad with some strong echo, so it's very difficult to react and to understand what are you talking. I'm very sad of that. I try to fix it with my IT and both colleagues from from organizers. So.
Peter, would you like me to?
How can I continue?
Can you? Did you hear the question I asked? Let me repeat the question. So just for you to give us an idea, to introduce the Bratislava Stock Exchange, firstly, and then secondly, to give us an idea of maybe some of the most important projects that you've been working on the last few months, and you have 2 minutes.
I'm really sorry. The echo does make it not able to understand.
No problem. Let's try and fix the IT issue and then come back to you.
Thank you.
Marek, over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Richard, Peter, we miss you. That's first. But just a brief update. We had very good first half a year, record revenues for our capital group, both in financial instruments and commodities. We introduced agriculture market, and we got another grant from the National Center of Research and Development for our project Private Market, what is digitalization of asset tokenization. But I will have a chance to talk about this later, so I leave remaining 1.5 minutes for the colleagues to talk.
Sure, thank you. Peter, do you want to try again, or should we move on? I think we move on. Okay. From my own perspective, from my own experience of doing some work in London, obviously as the London representative of the exchange, one of the things you hear from investors is that as a region, why don't you simply do more together? Okay. What does that really mean? I'm going to ask maybe some of our panelists to think about what could we do more together? What should we do more together? What are some of the obstacles you think we're facing in Brussels or amongst the global investment community? Who wants to go first? Maybe Peter, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, well, what we can do together, I have certain experience, our capital group are holder of the 4 exchanges in the region, and we are holder of the 2 exchanges, and I'm also serving as a president of European Exchange Federation. It is relatively complicated, actually, to find things to do really together. There is definitely some space in technology to do something together, which usually leads to the cost saving. There is probably some space in a post trading, but I really strongly feel that where we could do most together is the lobbying effort in Brussels. We have very strong participation. I think there must be something like 1/3 of the members of European Parliament, probably between 1/4 and 1/3 members of the European Parliament, and also the people in the Commission are coming from our region, and we should use this lever to be more visible on the map. There is already something changing, but when there is really strategic discussion about the future of the European capital markets, there are actually very few people invited from our part of Europe around the table. I give you an example. There has been a high-level forum for Capital Market Union formed last year in the autumn, where there were 27 top managers from European financial institutions present. And there has been roughly 10 people with some links to UK or directly British. In the time, we know there was Brexit happening, and these guys will basically not going to be part of the European Union, but only 3 people from the CE region. And there was myself and 2 others, which was ridiculously disproportionate, and we should try to be much more visible. I'm really glad that Marek sits with me and Richárd sits with me on the board of Federation of European Stock Exchanges. So this is one place where we are already properly represented, but it should be more visible also on the political discussions about the new rules for the capital market, about the nitty-gritty details, how to communicate with the, for example, index providers, which is a huge topic for all of us, the country classification. We are all classified as a second, third, or fourth tier countries against the rest of the Europe. And what is most important, we speak here about the communication among our countries, but there are 4 different country classifications in those countries which we see on the map, which makes even the presentation against the investors quite difficult, because there are simply different investors looking at the market, like Slovenian, Polish, and Bulgarian, and Croatian, and Czech, and Austrian. So that are different parts of the world, of the investment world. So there are a lot of the challenges. We have to start from here, I believe.
Okay. That's Aleš, please.
Yeah. Well, hello. What Peter just said, I completely agree with that. Maybe this is a long-term run. There are maybe some low-hanging fruits before that, hopefully. We all know that regulation is getting bigger and bigger every year, and no matter whether you are a Deutsche Börse or Ljubljana Stock Exchange, you have to fulfill the requirements no matter the size. And this is, of course, costly, and it's a quite huge burden for the stock exchanges, brokerage houses, and so on. If you don't have economy of scale, it's really difficult to survive in this environment. So the only possibility is to work together, not necessary as an in ownership sense, but maybe just as an alliance or a partnership, what we are trying to establish right now. And the other thing is that we, as especially small countries, Poland is here an exception, we are under the radar. So nobody knows about our capital markets because we are too small. We have really few blue chips in our country, especially in Slovenia. You probably know Krakow because it's also listed on your stock exchange. But there are a few more blue chips, and all other 99% are SMEs, which are again under the radar of every single global investor. So to come on the radar of these global investors, we have to work together. But not only just the stock exchanges coincidentally being in the same region, but behaving like a region, promoting ourselves like a region, having regional conferences, having brands, building brands, or CE or 3 Cs or whatever. We have to do this as a product, meaning first of all, settle down the basis. You also mentioned before, so infrastructure, technologies, and so on, so that somebody that comes to this region, whether trading in Ljubljana or Warsaw or whatever, it's the same experience, the same trading platform, and so on. So make it easier. It doesn't matter which of the countries, the procedure is the same. So make it easier and easier for the investors, building the brand, and of course, lobbying in Brussels. I completely agree.
Thank you, Aleš. Richárd, you know, just echoing what Aleš just said, working together. You talked about cooperating. What are your thoughts on what we could do together, what we should do together? Richárd.
I agree with what was said. I agree with Peter in the lobbying aspect, and with Aleš in representing our region towards the global investors. What maybe I would add is to represent our national companies to the regional investors. So I think that there could be much more investment across the countries inside the region, because I think, as Aleš said, that only a few companies are large enough to be interesting for global investors. However, for regional investors, I think a wider range of companies can be interesting. So for that, I think the CE Plus Index is a good initiative, and I think that we should promote that first of all among regional investors and then to global and European investors.
Thanks, Richard. Radu, is there anything you'd like to add on what would help the Bucharest market?
Oh, I would just complete you, Peter, about Brussels. I think that in order to have a stronger voice there, we have to better do our job at home. I think that our power there depends on how strong we are on our local market. So I think that everything goes back, even if we talk about regulation, because regulation, of course, comes from Brussels, but it's applied by the local regulator. So the relation we have as a market with the local regulator, with the government, with the political power, with the local ecosystem, it's vital in order to build a stronger ecosystem locally. And what I think is very important is what we are doing right now, right here. Communicating, sharing best practices, because of course we can take from one to another, we can learn from one to another and export things which are working to our home countries. And of course, in terms of promotion, talking about regional conferences, to promote the local companies which are listed, that would be very good. It would be a great opportunity for us to work together and for our companies to meet between them and to meet the investor base.
Okay, thanks, Radu. Maybe Marek.
Well, in a nutshell, it's competing against the scale. Yeah? So if you compete against the scale, you have to be smart and select niches. And for me, being smart is mainly related to technology. That's why we decided to build up our own trading engine. We built a trading system for tokenized assets and non-financial assets, and plenty of other technologies in data space and so on. And I believe really that we can do better when we applied modern technologies, and we can help ourselves to differentiate in this market via some not so obvious solutions like this tokenization of non-financial instruments. And niches, it's rather difficult to tell for every country what should be the niche, but in general, the perception is, and reality is also, that we have in the region a great pool of talents. When you think about STEAM alumni, actually in Poland alone there are more science technology alumni per year than in all Scandinavian countries together. So we have a great pool of talent. And only 15,000 less than in whole Germany, although the population of Germany is more than twice of Poland. So we have a great pool of talent, and it is widely accepted and widely known globally. And we as a stock exchange, we selected our niche as a gaming industry. Currently we have over 40 companies on our venue. Most companies in this industry are listed in Tokyo on Japan Stock Exchange, and are 44, but in our IPO pipelines another 28. So realistically, this or latest next year we'll have the most gaming companies listed on our venue in the world, simply. And by doing that, we also helped building up the coverage for these companies. Our analysts are highly regarded globally. Our local analysts are highly regarded as great experts in the gaming industry. So this is a kind of spillover effect. Global investors buy research from our brokerage houses. When they get high quality research, they are more tempted to invest, and we have currently largest in terms of market cap company on our venue is a gaming company. What's a success story. So the success story attracts more investors. So I fully agree with regulation and cooperation on indexes. This is without doubt very good method, but I will encourage colleagues here to look also to technology issue, how we can solve the technology issue together and leapfrog bigger exchanges. And second is looking for the niches, and we'll be, as Warsaw Stock Exchange, we'll be very happy to support niches, because indeed there is a difference in sizes, and maybe in some promoting some niches from the region we can be somewhat helpful. Thanks.
So some niches, some technology. Aleš, you also mentioned some low-hanging fruit. I wonder if you could maybe expand a little bit on, what kind of low-hanging fruit is there out there that we might consider doing stuff together on? And before we go back to maybe the topic of Brussels and lobbying.
Yeah, as I already mentioned, I mean, we have to behave as a region. So these conferences and building a brand, and what Richard said, I completely agree. So we should engage our local investors, so regional investors, to invest in our neighbor countries, because we all know, let's say, our local investors, pension funds and so on, 99 or 98% of the money goes outside, and probably also outside of the CE region. So maybe some effort here that, let's say, investors from Slovenia would put a little bit more emphasis on the region, and vice versa from Hungary and Poland and so on, so that we try to help each other. Of course, we should be rational here and not exaggerating, because there are some rules there in place. But if we start somewhere with small margins here, this can be immediately visible. And also building a brand, this is not something that it would take us 5 years. We can start yesterday.
A brand for the region.
For the region, of course, for the region to become visible on the global scale. So these are all things that are not dependent on the Brussels, on the politicians, but we can do it together, 5 persons.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone like to come in on that? I don't know, Richard, anything that you'd like to add about that, bringing the regional investment more into our CE region?
I don't have a solution exactly how it should be done, but the index, as I said, is a good first step. Have more and more funds follow the index, automatically will get more coverage for these companies that are included. Maybe some new more entities that contribute really an index family without promoting more the SME market companies and so on. But also, besides that, maybe we can think a little bit more about mixing activities in some of the countries, because in some countries there is, in other countries there is no. I think thinking long-term ahead, it is also an area for cooperation.
Okay, thank you, thank you. No?
Maybe can I add to that? The cross-border traffic, as we call it, or cross-border trading in NCE, this is not an easy task. This is, many of the companies, many of the private companies, investment banks have tried to do so, and most of them somehow failed and closed it down, because it's simply a pure fact that the people are investing in the companies about which they are reading in newspapers or internet in those days, who are domestic companies, and then the Teslas, and the Microsoft, and maybe the Siemens, I don't know how many articles, you have, and how many analyses you have in Poland about the Croatian companies or Hungarian companies. Very little. So these companies are invisible, and who can make them visible? There will be brokers. There will be investment banks who are trading and who are active regionally. And I only really see one broker who is literally in every CE countries, and every CE country is probably top 5. This is Wood & Co.
Headquartered in Prague.
Yeah, okay, but that's coincidence,
Sure.
you know, and they are there. I think the biggest operation is in Warsaw anyway. So, and no others, you know, these INGs, you know, which have been doing the CAIBs, Great Anstalt in past, they all pull up from the market, and we have just Wood remaining. There's a little bit of Erste, maybe, and other Austrian banks who are really serving this as a region. So also we have to speak to our partners, we have to speak to our members, you know, to be more active cross-border and try to be more active cross-border. You know, this private sector should also help us with this initiative.
Just a remark, Peter, it's somehow struggling that when you think UiPath, Romanian company, or Bolt, or wherever, they have a great PR in Poland, a great coverage, and somehow listed companies, which is absolutely absurd, has a worse PR than those which are held privately by the venture funds. So somehow, I come from the venture capital industry, and somehow I knew how much money is and effort is put into PR in the neighborhood countries or target countries just to warm up the topic. Of course, startup topics are easier to be warmed up, but somehow with research coverage, but also media coverage, we should, I think, follow what the ventures are doing. So they are constantly promoting the companies they are held in their hands, and especially in the region, because you never know where the new round is coming. You never know when this company will enter the given market in the neighborhood. So somehow, I think we can do better. And if there is a demand, there will be supply for the service. Because I fully agree with you that through my bank, it's easier to invest abroad in the US than in any of the countries of the region. It will be quite abstract if I call my banker and say, I would like to buy a stock in Romania. And well, I don't know if you have a market access at all, but you can have any US or large US stock available, or even some Japanese stocks are easier available than Romanian stock, which is absolutely absurd. So that's why I think we can still do better, as the venture capital is quite successful in promoting in the region the companies from their portfolio.
Okay. Peter, over to you, really for the closing remarks, in fact, if I may, about Brussels and FESA. I mean, you're in a unique position as president of FESA. Obviously, there are board members sitting alongside. In 1 minute, because that's all that's left.
Right, okay.
What should we be doing?
I basically said we have to coordinate, and my colleague from Romania as well said, you know, we have to coordinate with our politicians, and they have to spend at least once a quarter, 20 minutes chat about the capital markets. It should be prepared by us and maybe our capital market associations to have a banks there or whatever. And those are the topics which are now discussed. Those are the rules which are now discussed. Have to be special focus taken on the EU CE focus. People who are writing, or who were writing MiFID in the past, have been always writing the rules, having in mind there is $100 million derivative trade on the London Stock Exchange with derivatives of Siemens, and it's done by Goldman Sachs. That's their view. That's how they are writing the MiFID, and it should work with this. They are not having in mind that Polish pension fund using Czech broker Wood & Co. wants to buy shares in Krakow. You know, they simply, you know, that's completely remote thinking. They think about the first deal. And that's how the rules sometimes are looking like. They are one size fits all. But the capital market is not one size fits all. Krakow is probably 1,000 times smaller than Tesla or whatever. And then Wood & Co. is 100 times smaller than Goldman Sachs. So, you know, they have to fit also the smaller ones and the middle ones in order to build a really strong pan-European network of capital markets.
I think that probably sums it up very well. So gentlemen virtually, gentlemen in the room, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Gents, if you follow me, if I could ask you to follow me in that direction, thank you.
Dziękuję panowie. A pana
I thank you. And may you please join us here for a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me a very brief communication on what to expect in a moment. I thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for this very interesting panel. There is one important aspect that was addressed. We used to say that business and politics, they shouldn't mix, they shouldn't mingle, they shouldn't merge, but it seems that now such support is more than needed. So coffee break, that's my announcement. We're having a coffee break in a moment. And
Szanowni Państwo, witam po przerwie. Nie przedłużając, chciałem zaprosić na scenę mojego ulubionego dziennikarza ekonomicznego, Marek, dziennik Gazeta Prawna. Zapraszam i oddaję od razu głos.
Dziękuję bardzo serdecznie. Dziękuję. To ja też się odwdzięczam, my powinniśmy występować w duecie po prostu tutaj i prawić sobie komplementy. Będziemy trochę mówili komplementów, proszę Państwa, za chwilę, bo będziemy mówili o tym, w jaki sposób zmienia się rzeczywistość i w jaki sposób rynki finansowe wymuszają zmianę rzeczywistości, która może się bardzo mocno przyczynić do być może do uratowania naszej planety i lepszej przyszłości naszych dzieci, ale to się chyba też dzieje dlatego, że z kolei na tych rynkach finansowych zmianę wymuszają inwestorzy. Trochę o inwestorów.
Because investors are forcing the change in those markets. So we will be talking about the investors a bit and a bit about the future. So please allow me to invite the panelists to the stage. So Izabela Olszewska from the member of the board of the Warsaw Stock Exchange, Kamil Wojtkowski, who is the president and representative of the Global Compact Network Council, Robert Sroka, who is a representative of the CE of Capital Partners, and the director for CEE and Baltic States of the European Bank for Development and Reconstruction and Development. And this panel will be held in Polish. So, Madam President, if you would allow me to, I would like to ask the first question to you. Why, from the point of view of the Warsaw Stock Exchange as a company and the Stock Exchange as the organizer of markets, is the issue of ESG so important? Why are you getting involved in these activities? Why are you creating such indexes? Why are you starting this cooperation? What is the corporate logic and what is the logic of the market infrastructure in this involvement? Thank you very much for this question. So let me start by saying that in the equity market, the ESG, or sustainable investing, or investing in accordance with ESG principles, is a very important trend and a very rapidly growing trend. Quite recently, I heard opinions that this is a passing fad. This is some sort of an approach that will soon become out of date. Well, I don't think so. I think this is here to stay with us, and in general, ESG will shape the equity markets in the coming future and in the slightly more distant future. The catalysts for the development of ESG or the growth of ESG are, first of all, the regulations, and secondly, technologies and changes in the investing community. More specifically, the coming into the market of a new group of investors, millennials or Z generation, and these people in their investments are very much interested that their money be invested in a responsible way. This is what research shows. So we, as the Warsaw Stock Exchange, approach this topic with a very business-like approach. So ESG for us is very important as for people. This is to some extent a PR topic, but from my point of view, it's mainly a business topic. So if you look at the value of assets that are being managed in a sustainable way or according to the ESG criteria, this value is over $30 trillion. So this is a huge market, and this represents both passive investment, so according to an index, or active investment into very specific companies and instruments. So we travel a lot, or we have been doing a lot of remote road shows, and we have heard opinions from global funds like BlackRock, Aviva, Amundi, and other large entities, large institutions, who are telling us, look, our policy now is that ESG inclusion, meaning taking the ESG criteria into the investment policy, is around 30% of our funds, but in 2021 it might be 100%. So all the criteria for selecting entities will be based on ESG rules. And if you have a company that is listed on the Warsaw Stock Exchange, and if it has the right policy and ESG strategy and reports correctly, because it's not enough to have this policy, but you also have to report in the way that investors expect you to, this company will be an investable company. Whereas if one of those companies does not have an ESG policy, or if it doesn't simply report this correctly, then according to the opinions we have heard, it will end up on the watch list, and those investors will stop looking at it. From the point of view of the stock exchange, this is the loss of some business. So we cannot pass this without paying attention. So we, as the stock exchange, have decided to become a leader in terms of implementing the ESG strategy in the Polish market. And of course we have this regional cooperation, so we'll be very happy to share our experience. And we have taken multiple steps. They are particularly steps addressed to companies, but also to our investors, to develop the appropriate knowledge and to show them that this is an important element of their business. In terms of companies, together with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and Grzegorz, the CEO here, and his team, we have managed to establish a project as part of which we will develop a practical guidebook from the business point of view addressed to companies. So how should the companies create their ESG strategies and how they should report so that they would be above the radar of those investors. And this is a very important project we are running with EBRD now. We also have ambitious education plans for our investors. We have a major component concerning indexes and benchmark with our subsidiary GPW Benchmark. We have a contract with KPMG, so we want to get the best experience and transfer it to our market. And as you have mentioned at the beginning, we are a public company ourselves, and we have to get ready for this so that we would not be a company that falls below the radar of the investors. And we have a lot of work on behalf of our management board and our ER, so that we can shape the company in accordance with those rules. And one more topic that I wanted to mention to the CEOs of the stock exchanges, a very important thing that we could do jointly is the issue of passive investing according to indexes. And here we have a major common role that in those ESG indexes we should have companies from our region, so that we wouldn't be omitted, because there is a large group of investors who are passive investors, and they will be looking at the composition of the index and invest in it properly. So one purpose of your activity is also to make this universal, or actually the key to this, to understanding ESG and its role in the market, is the notion of universality, that this is becoming a rule of proceeding and this should be available as broadly as possible, and this is why you are acting on this. Yes, it's becoming a rule of how to proceed. And secondly, I would like to say that the regulations cover the entire financial market. So all categories of investors or companies or stock exchanges, all those entities at some stage have to take into account ESG criteria. So taking a look from the point of view of the companies, this is not another issue that concerns public companies, that is listed companies, but it's also a topic that concerns every company, because every company at some point in its life will need capital to develop. It will go to the bank and it will be asked about ESG. If they talk to an investment fund or an insurance fund, they will be asked about ESG. If it goes public, the investors will assess this company from the point of view of ESG. So ESG is becoming an absolutely universal trend in the equity market. So this is not something like, oh, more regulatory obligations that we have to report, but this is universal, that it's universal among investors, it's universal in the global capitalism. So with regards to investors and how they perceive the reality, I will ask you, Director, and then the universality in capitalism, I will ask Director Rodzewski for.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Well, to wrap up what the President said, and she mentioned that upward trend, I want to assure you that I do not see that trend overturning in the medium to long-term horizon. When it comes to passive investment, it's just enough to have a look at the ETFs in the first part of this year, and 60% of them were satisfactory when compared to benchmarks. And in terms of figures, about 3,000 of the largest institutional investors, they're members of these investors, and so they manage billions of trillions of dollars, and they need to take into account all these non-financial ratios when managing their capital. So this is, according to some estimations, about 15% of the global capital are invested in consideration of non-financial factors, and in Europe that is about 50%. So if you do not follow the trend, if you do not adapt, you won't have any funds for investment. So in the nearest future, we'll be fundraising again. We'll go to endowment to the largest U.S. pension funds or family offices, and without ESG, without the DSG, we're certainly unable to raise that funding, including private equity in Europe, and that translates into companies' perspective. And 70% of our investors nowadays, because it is also my job to alliance in the ESG sector, and they do expect some specific solutions here. And the key thing is to debunk the myth of that trend. Well, we should be talking about the ESG whereabouts, and well, in English, one calls it non-financial data, or what I call not yet financial data, the data that does affect the value of companies from value building, risk management aspects, and so on. So you're saying that gradually access to financing will be more difficult when not playing by the rules. Is it profitable for companies? Does it bring any benefits to companies to play by the rules? Well, it's not about profit or no profit. It's about to be or not to be. It's about access to capital, to insurance, to assurance, to customer and client pool, access to debt financing, estimating costs of external financing. So it's about to be or not to be. I could give you a zillion of examples, and we have companies in Serbia, in the Czech Republic, and these markets are all very similar. So let me give an example. We have a network of printing houses, and we know that at this stage, if we do not introduce new technologies, allowing to use biodegradable packaging, we know that very soon our largest clients, like Yves and Ferrero, they will turn their backs on us because they, in turn, are expected by their client to comply with some environmental rules. So if we don't take up on that again, our business will be gone. So from that point on, and from this aspect, investors should also analyze potential of their companies. Kamil Wyszkowski has been talking for years about that new normal. So we may say as well that the future has come now. And the past 2 years have been a breakthrough when it comes to looking at the reality in Poland and globally. Well, your question is philosophical as such. But let me remind you that the SDO reporting has a very important consequence for the overall policy, which is the prevention of a climate change. Last year, on September the 6th, the most important developmental banks, also the regional banks, reached an agreement to withdraw their capital from high-emission investment projects, and commercial banks follow suit. And that shifted gears, and that changed the direction towards a green investment project, green financing. So that's the era of financing, promoting green investment. In terms of investment, Poland failed to complete that fifth coal-powered block in Ostrołęka power plant, but there is this focus on renewable energy sources and transfer from the conventional energy production to renewable resources. Countries similar to Poland, of similar structure of the infrastructure and dependence on fossil fuel like brown coal and black coal, well, 43 to 45% of other countries, they have similar structure. So the shift towards pure energy is the key. So if we have smart diplomacy here, that technology could be used in the 43 to 45 countries unmentioned with a good profit to the Polish business. And now if our commodity exchange or if other exchanges are to play the key role in that, that is one of the key elements where investors will be fighting to attract more capital. So remember the Paris agreement of 2004. So we had the green order the European Green Order next to the American Green Order and the Asian Green Order and African Green Order. We need to watch them all en masse, because only then we can see how fascinating that is and how rapid this technological advancement is happening. Now, what about the perception, the expected perception of companies' activity? We're going more towards creating common playground, common rules for reporting, I mean the standards. Let me remind you that attempts have been already made for quite some time. The first attempt to come up with standards to measure the negative impact of the climate change, that was 1989, the Tokyo meeting, and the conclusions of the summit requested that we should be introducing such a reporting system. And then we have the climate process that's been happening for 26 years right now. So that's been quite a while. So now looking at the ESG, we're very much looking forward to it, that we're in the process of creating it. It's not only creating the mechanism, but we need to assess credibility of companies when it comes to reliability and their approach to investing their investors' funds. And that is also a discussion, a debate about risk factors. A company with the ESG reporting and some control mechanisms introduced, and with such mechanism in place, it's going to be more stable and secure investment for an investors. This company is not going to disappear overnight because its business will be stable, and the company's stock will be growing in price, and that's one of the reasons of the climate policy transformations. Well, I believe that we have many European regulations which remain still to be introduced. Well, the US is different, other continents are different. But here I would mention a uniform reporting taxonomy, so that there is a common understanding of the ESG principles for business. Then again, the concept of ESG criteria understood by institutional investors, and there are so many indications and instructions of benchmarks and factors like low carbon and other green indicators and factors. As a Warsaw Stock Exchange benchmark, we are looking at our indices. We have our stock exchange indices from the Warsaw Stock Exchange, and we need to report them appropriately. And we need to make them green, because that would be business. Okay, now we're going to give the floor to Grzegorz Zieliński.
Because Grzegorz has reminded us of this example of the Ostrołęka hard coal-fired power unit, which was in the end not built as a coal-fired power unit, even though the Polish government was pressing on this very much, because you simply couldn't assemble the financing for it, even though a large part of the Polish banking sector is held by the state. But the problem was the banks wouldn't be able to refinance if they invested into a project that was so environmentally challenging. So we are in a new reality, and it is the banks that are now the leaders of this green transformation. So Director, how fast are we going in the direction of common rules? To what extent is this trend irrevocable, and what can we do so that as a stock exchange and also as companies we can find our place in this world well? So for me it's on the one hand very easy to talk about ESG because ESG has been important for EBRD from the very beginning. So for some 30 years now, we have been promoting some kind of activity related to environment, to social order and so on. But over those 30 years, this role was very difficult because I want to mention that yes, commercial banks to a great extent declared that they will not finance high emission projects, so high carbon projects. They said that the carbon footprint of projects that they will finance must be below a certain level, and we're very happy about the fact that such procedures and standards that EBRD had promoted for so many years are now more widely accepted. So far, 62% of our EBRD financing last year in Poland was green financing, and this percentage is growing from one year to the next. You have asked about procedures. Obviously, we have several sources of such procedures. On the one hand, we have the information and regulations and the guidelines of the European Union. On the other hand, we have the best global standards, and we want to use both of those sources or even three sources to promote the Polish guidelines. Like Elisa has mentioned, we are working very closely with the Warsaw Stock Exchange to develop such standards. At present, we are at the stage of selecting consultants who would support us in creating those unified standards, and we expect that those standards will appear in the first quarter of next year, and we will promote them very actively through a series of training events and seminars addressed both to public companies, listed companies, and also private companies, companies that have not been listed, but for them ESG is no less important. And I want to briefly touch upon another topic that you have mentioned before. Is this profitable or not? So I fully agree with what has been said, that this is to be or not to be in the long and medium term. But in the short term already, we can see that, for example, bonds issued on Central European markets, the ones that are green, they can be placed by the issuers at better prices. The differences are not huge right now. They are maybe just a few basis points. But at the time of low interest rates, every single basis point is important. Is it so that the effort put into adjusting to those standards is already profitable? I mean, maybe I shouldn't be calling it the effort. Maybe I'm too much of an advocatus diabolic by questioning whether it's easy to join this project. Well, I would say that some effort has to be put into it, but a lot or the majority of public companies or Polish entities already see that this is a subject you cannot avoid, that this is not a direction you can avoid, and both financing banks and investors and trading partners will be asking questions which you have to be able to answer. If you have the European economy, which is highly integrated, and the Polish producer is exporting to a larger German producer who wants to boast of green projects and a low carbon footprint, so they will expect that their subcontractor, their supplier, will also contribute to this green approach. And obviously the reporting, the ESG reporting or green reporting will involve some additional costs, but the cost does not have to be very high. And this is one of the purposes of creating those standards, so that we would create standards that are accessible to the broadest possible group of Polish companies. So thank you very much, and I want to thank you very much for mentioning the final consumer, the buyer of the products of some European company, because it is that consumer that decides. Europe is not just a huge export and production power, but it's a huge consumer market for all of us, including us from the Central and Eastern Europe. So Grzegorz Zieliński, thank you very much for joining us. And I would like to ask the panelists present in the room to tell us just one sentence about what's in store for us, what you're awaiting in terms of the ESG perspective. Robert Sroka first. Well, they are waiting for specific data which has been confirmed in real action. So we need such methods of rating ESG that will show really the risk and the value for the investor. So methods that will allow you to show that having a business continuity plan or the succession plan during the COVID pandemic made the companies able to go through this period more easily. Information that will tell us that the company has such a climate strategy that in 2 or 3 years the company will not be surprised by some change of regulations. So we need a rating that will allow us to show easily. Let me use this example. There is a company that has a refrigeration facility, and it has a second source of power supply that will allow it to survive either a blackout or some interruption in electricity delivery caused by strong winds, that it will allow this company not to stop its business, and that the company will continuously deliver value to its shareholders. So we want activities to be real, that we are able to assess, and that we can give a rating to investors that will be credible. So, I would add to what Robert has mentioned. It would be very helpful to us if we had more knowledge and more awareness of why we need the ESG reporting. That it's not another burden, but it simply brings us closer to a better structured economy that is also safer to us, because, you know, humans are hot-blooded animals, and if NASA is not wrong, then we and the birds are the ones who need stable temperatures, and you know, the climate crisis is hurting us ourselves. So ESG is one of the more important instruments that can protect us from this risk, and the fact that we don't realize how bad the situation is, well, this is another issue, that another step that has to be taken, because let me remind you, we're talking about Poland and the Polish market, so the knowledge about ESG reporting, well, is available only to a group of specialists. So I have worked for the United Nations, and I know that nobody reads UN reports because they are boring and they have those statistical appendices, but the recent research, over 4,000 Poles were surveyed, and over 60% of the Polish society believes that that the climate is changing, the change is negative, and it should be immediately counteracted. And who is supposed to do it? Politicians and the business. And with what tools? Well, we need those tools, so we need to build a reasonable set of indicators that would allow us to measure how far the company has progressed along this route. And we also have the carrot, because this rating will mean that people will be happy to invest in this company. So this will give the company a willing proposition. So this is why I would recommend the future of ESG reporting, that in the long and medium term perspective, this is really good for the company, whereas in the short term perspective, well, it requires an ambitious policy. But the worst thing is that if in the short-term perspective, the management, let's say 1 or 2 people in the management, are unaware of ESG, of the climate change, and their company is not taking part in those processes, and because that company might disappear. and especially if the investors who are saving for their pension would like to see this company still in existence in 30 years. So, Madam, on behalf of the Warsaw Stock Exchange, let me say that we are awaiting the companies that are listed on our stock exchange to be well educated, and so that they would see in this ESG transformation that this will give them a much broader group of potential investors, shareholders or bondholders, and this will allow them to reduce the cost of sourcing capital. So this is important for them in business terms. So we are also waiting for the investors, also local investors in the region, to be supporters of this change, so that they would understand in their investment decisions why ESG has to be taken into account and what this gives them. And finally, we're waiting very egoistically that the stock exchange not only doesn't lose the business it has now, but that through our activities we could attract this large-scale capital. We have talked about $30 trillion that could be attracted to our country and used for investments on our market. So thank you very much, Izabela, Olszewska, Kamil Sroka, Krzysztof Dziedziński, and thank you very much for the time you have spent here, for participating in this panel. And Ernest has praised me for not overrunning the time, but actually you didn't overrun the time because you started late. Anyway, I wonder which of those three letters is the most important, but I guess this is the topic for the next discussion. G, I would say G. Definitely G, governance. Okay, thank you very much for participating in this panel. I would like to thank you for watching the transmission, and I would like to invite those of you in the room to the meeting in the group of the press, then lunch, and then we will reconvene at 3 p.m. Thank you very much.